Good morning, Rutherford County. It's so good to be with you again. This is Word of Faith Responds and Speaks Out and is telling you the truth about the Word of Faith Fellowship. We've been going on a series of radio programs now for several weeks, and we have really enjoyed doing this. This has been exciting for us as a church because this is an opportunity for us to share with you the truth about who we really are as a church. And we just want to say first that we appreciate the feedback. We have had many people say that they so appreciate us doing this, and that means a lot to us. We talked about in the past how you've heard so many things in the news and the media that have been false about our church, and we have in the past tried to speak out and respond in the media and found that we've hit obstacles in every front. Our words have been twisted, our statements have not been included, and so forth. And so we prayed about it, and this is one thing that God has led us to do, to tell you the truth, because God wants you to know the truth about the Word of Faith Fellowship. And another thing that you can do to learn more about our church is go to our website at wordoffaithfellowship.org. And on that website, you will see a link that says Word of Faith Speaks Out, and you will see many videos from church members that are responding to the recent AP articles that have been against our church. And you're going to hear from church members that will tell you the truth about the false accusations that you may have heard. So please go to our website and you will learn in detail about the truth about this. Also, if you have any questions for our church, we welcome those questions. We want to hear from you. And so you can contact us. The best way to do that is by email at truth@wffnc.org. That's truth@wffnc.org. We're now in a series on the history of the persecution at Word of Faith. Carol was with you last week and has been going from the very start all the way back to 1992, and some of the persecution that our church has experienced. And in her first program, she talked about the scriptures in the Bible that specifically talk about Christians experiencing persecution. You know, it's amazing when you read the Bible. I think if you really study persecution and how that goes with a Christian life, you might be amazed at how much the Bible references persecution. And Carol referenced some of those scriptures, but just to summarize, the Bible clearly says in 2 Timothy that everyone who desires to pursue a godly life will be met with persecution. And Jesus, of course, in John chapter 15 said, if they persecuted me and if they hated me, talking about the world, then how much more will they do it to you? And then we know that Jesus said that he promised that he would bless us, those who believe in him, and he would pour out his blessings upon us. But he said at the same time, it will come with persecution. So we know that this is a life that is referenced in the Bible. Of course, the Bible goes on to say that with every persecution, God always delivers his people out of it. So we as a church have experienced this for years and years and years. We've experienced a heart that wants to serve God and live godly and holy, and at the same time we've seen how the devil so has hated that, and the devil has brought persecution for so many years. And so part of why we're doing this series now on the history of persecution as a church, we want you to understand and see how what we've gone through is exactly in accordance with what the Bible talks about. And yet, through it all, God has brought us through every persecution, all the way back to 1992, and you've heard the last program Carol took us to early 2000s, and I want to pick up there. Today I have with me Joveille Clark. He is a member of the Word of Faith Fellowship. He's been part of our church since 2001. He's a great friend of mine. He's a great guy, and he is here to tell you about some of the things he went through. And you're going to be amazed at this, and I want everybody to tune in and listen very closely because, truthfully, as I was talking to Joveille, his story is one of the most amazing stories I've heard. So turn your radio up, whatever you need to do, because this is going to be pretty amazing today, what you're going to hear from this young man. But let me give you the background first. Carol left off last Friday talking about an organization called Faith Freedom Fund. Okay, and this was an organization that it was founded with the help of some people at Adaville Baptist Church and somebody that left our church. And the organization, really what it was doing, this is in the early 2000s, was number one, the design was to try to pull people out of our church. Okay, they were raising money, pulling people out of the church, and the other thing they were doing was absolutely slandering our church and making these false accusations against our church. And so Faith Freedom Fund partnered with an organization called Wellsprings. Now, Wellsprings is, at that time, was labeled as a deprogramming institution where people could come and be deprogrammed from cults. Okay, that's their title. That's what they claim to do. Now, if you remember from the program on Friday, if you were listening, that Carol talked briefly about a mother whose name was Shanna Muse, who came to our church from a very rough background, had problems with drugs and different things from Florida. She had 4 children that she brought to our church. She had family here, and not only did she see her life change when she was here, but she saw her children's life change just tremendously. And at some point, she decided to leave and go back to her old lifestyle, but her children wanted to stay, begged to stay, and they became very close with the Covington family that was in our church. And so Shannon Muse allowed the children to stay with the Covington family, only to come back after several months to try to get her children back. Of course, they begged to stay. They wanted to stay. This was the first time they were stable and happy and so forth. And we left off there, and what Carol talked about was when Shannon Muse came back to try to get these 4 children, and they were begging to stay, there was a person that she brought with her, okay, and the person's name was Mary Alice Chronologer, who was affiliated with Wellsprings. Remember, we talked about the deprogramming cult organization. Now, here's where we're at today. At that same time, we have a young man in our church named Joveille, who at that time was 17. Is that right, Joveille?
Yeah, 17 years old.
And so at that time, Joveille was here, and his parents were not living here, but they had allowed him to be here, and he was doing fantastic. And he was loving it here and having a great time, and his parents were coming back and forth and visiting him. They had wanted him to be here to get some help in his life, and he had seen God do so much in his life. And so where we're going to pick up now is Joveille's going to tell you, because at some point, unfortunately, his parents had listened to some of the things that Shannon Muse was saying about the church that were false, and they ended up trying to use this Mary Chronologer as well to, quote, deprogram her son. And it's amazing what this young man went through, and you're going to hear the details about it, and you're going to actually hear who the abuser really is, and you're going to find out that it wasn't our church, because we don't tolerate abuse, but rather it was these deprogrammers that he went to and was forced to go to. So, Joveille, would you first just tell a little bit about how you got here?
Okay, sure. First of all, I would like to say thank you for allowing me to be on the air. Quite the experience. I came here back, like Mark said, back in 2001. Is around March, and I wanted to come here. I wanted to come here because I was living in Saginaw, Michigan, because that's where I was born and raised. I wanted to come here because I had some problems as a teenager. I was getting involved in drugs, major alcohol, running around with girls. I was partying, and and I knew I needed a life change experience, and I knew that the environment that I was living in at the time was not conducive into helping me come out of that. Being in Saginaw, Michigan, you can look it up online. It's a very high crime rate city. The neighborhood that I lived in was just horrible. So, with that being said, my dad actually is an assistant. He was an assistant pastor at a church in Saginaw, Michigan, and he had known Sam and Jane there for years. So, with that being said, because he knew Sam and Jane and had a very close relationship with them, he knew this is the place for me to go to. And so, and I was in full agreement. I wanted to come. I had never been here before. I heard about the deliverance. I heard about the strong prayer. I heard about it all. I also heard about the persecution, but I still wanted to come. So I came here, and again, that was March of 2001, and I stayed nearly 2 years before I went. Ended up going back to Saginaw, and during that time, my parents would come back and forth for seminars. They would come visit me, maybe 3, 4 times out of the year. So we had a very close relationship, even though they weren't living here, and I talked to them on a weekly basis. So it wasn't like the allegation that you've probably heard before that Word of Faith separates families. That's not true. My family were very active in my life, even though they were living up north and I was down here in the south. So to kind of pick off where Mark talked about Mary Alice Chronologer, it started back in January of 2003. I hadn't turned 17 yet, and my father had been contacted by Shannon Muse and other ex-members of the Word of Faith about me being here, and that I was about to turn 18, and if he hadn't got me out of this church, he would never see me again. And at the time, the persecution was really bad at the church. So my dad was concerned, and so all of a sudden, the man who brought me here was one to take me out. So he showed up at where I was living one day. I actually stayed with a family here in the church, very loving family, and they took me in. So he showed up at the doorstep, unannounced. I had no idea he was coming. And I said, Daddy, why are you here? He said, I'm here to take you home. And at that moment, I told him no. Now, I want to emphasize something. I love my parents. And in any way where I would disrespect them, but I told him no because I knew what I had lived in. To give an example, the neighborhood that I lived in, it was known for crack, cocaine. I remember sleeping at night and hearing gunshots in the back of my house. I remember several cases of murders. Even a child was raped and murdered on the street behind me. The neighborhood was known for prostitution, so I knew what I had lived in, and I knew I didn't want to go back to that. And this was the first time I experienced a place where I didn't live and feel that fear, that torment, of what would happen to me, just thinking constantly if a bullet would go through my door or not. So, so that's the reason why I told my dad no. But eventually, the law enforcement got in the middle of everything, and so I was escorted to the DSS office. So I wasn't taken directly to my parents, but I was taken to the DSS office. And there was the first time I had met Melanie Taylor Hunt. I think Melanie Hunt is what she goes by. And I was there for about 3 hours.
Was she a social worker?
She was a social worker.
This is in Rutherford County?
This is Rutherford County DSS. She was a social worker. I remember seeing her once. She visited the school, but I never met her. I had never talked to her. So she sat down and she said, she wanted to talk to me. And I said, okay. And so, she noticed I was pretty upset. And she asked me the first question, why did I not want to go with my parents? So I explained to her. I said, this is the first time I felt safety. I explained to her that I've become a 4.0 student. GPA went up from a 2.0 to a 4.0. I loved the school I was in. I felt safe. I explained all this to her. I explained to her that I was a teenager that was battling alcohol and drugs before I came, and therefore, I did not want to go back to Michigan. So she said, okay. She left, and then maybe half an hour later, she came back. She wanted more questions. And these questions were more personal about the church. She asked if I had ever been abused. During the strong prayer session, was I ever hit or abused? And I explained to her, no. I explained to her that I've never been abused here. The abuse isn't allowed. And I explained to her that, our pastor, Jane Whaley, actually, preaches against abuse and how children should be disciplined, and no way should they be physically abused. So I explained that to her. I explained to her just how happy I've been. And so her next question to me was, well, you're 17 years old. Don't you feel like that you should be allowed the opportunity to go out and do what you want to do? Go out and party with your friends, go out and, go to rap concerts, rock concerts, whatever, things you just want to do. And I explained to her, I said, ma'am, I did that before. That's what I used to do. I said, because now I found Jesus, and this is the way I want to live, and I don't want to live that lifestyle anymore. And she didn't say much after that. So she leaves, and maybe an hour or two later, she comes back, and she tells me after we had spoken, and she, heard my side of why I want to be in the Word of Faith. She looked at me dead in the face, said, "I think you're in a cult. I think that you are programmed, and that you're in a very abusive environment."
Was this after you had told her that
This
you had
is
stopped doing the drugs,
is after
stopped drinking alcohol
exactly,
underage, and so forth?
exactly. And this is after I explained everything to her and how I was happy here. She told me that I was in a cult, I was being controlled, and that I was programmed. So from there, eventually, I ended up leaving with my parents. So my thinking, we're on our way to Saginaw, Michigan. And I remember driving on I-75, and all of a sudden we took a turn to go I-75 south. And so I remember asking my parents, what are we doing? Why we're not going I-75 north? And so, they told me, well, we're going to get some rest. So we pulled into a motel, and I was getting ready for bed, and my sister was with me as well. She was down here, and she was with me, and all of a sudden she bust into my room. We had two separate rooms. She busted into my room, and she was crying, scared, frightened. And I said, well, what's going on? What's going on? And she said, that lady's here. That lady, Mary Alice, is here. And we had never met Mary Alice, but we knew about Mary Alice because of her background and how Shannon Muse was using her to get to the four children. That's the only way we knew about her. And we had heard how how Shannon Muse had brought her with four separate vehicles trying to get the four children, prior to us meeting her. So that's only thing we knew. We knew she was a deprogrammer, and we wanted nothing to do with her. So I went to the room and I said, "Why are you here?" And at that time, my dad shut the door. He was guarding the door, and she was guarding the window. And she said, "I want to talk to you." Well, I said, "I don't want to talk to you." She said, "Well, you're going to talk to me, and you're going to do what I say." And so at that point, I remember trying to get out the door. My dad wouldn't let me out the door. I tried getting out the window. Mine were on the first floor of the motel room, so it wasn't like I was trying to jump out of a two-story building. But we're on the first floor. I was trying to get out the window, and she grabbed me, assaulted me, grabbed me, threw me down. She's a pretty strong lady.
And just for the listeners out there, as far as her size, just so people can understand this, was she bigger than you?
Well, she definitely weighed more than I did. She was,
Okay.
slightly shorter than me, but she was a pretty stocky woman, so she wasn't someone small. She's pretty strong. I'll probably size her up. She probably weighed about 200 at the time, and I was, just a senior in high school, so I was only like 150 pounds. So, so at that point, we wrestled. I tried getting to the phone. I mean, she had her hands on me. I'm trying to get to the phone. Eventually, they allowed me to call the police. I called the police, and I had noticed she had gone out of the motel before I did. She went to the motel, and she went out the door, and I had noticed she had went to the police officers. So several policemen, there were probably like 3 police officers there that showed up at the motel room. And I ran out to the hotel, and I explained to her, I said, she's a deprogrammer. My sister and I want nothing to do with her. And so the police officers, they didn't look like they were trying to help me. They didn't even look like they were really interested. And then I heard one police officer say, "Ma'am, you're right. I can tell that he has been using drugs." Now, I haven't been on drugs, haven't used drugs since I came here back in 2001, and this is 2003. So I wasn't on any medication, no drugs whatsoever.
Did
So
she actually get to the police before you
she
did?
got to the police.
Was talking to them
Yes.
before you ever got
Before
to them?
I was able to get to the police, she had got to them. And so what happened was she had told the police officers that she was a counselor trying to counsel me about my drug addiction. okay, and that she was helping my parents, and so that my parents has put her in charge of me, and that this is all part of therapy. So at that point, the police officer said they couldn't do anything about it. I had to obey my parents. They did suggest that, okay, either you listen to your parents or I'll take you to juvenile. I said, well, take me to juvenile because I didn't want to, sit here and listen to this lady because of the stories I heard about her. And uh, they said no, because you want to go to juvenile, we're not going to allow you. You're going to go with your parents and you're going to listen to the therapist. So at that point, I kind of felt like it was kind of hopeless. Um, and I had no clue what this woman was going to do. I just knew she was one that we didn't want to be around, and potentially dangerous. But I just had no idea what was going to happen. So the first night that we were there, you know, we couldn't eat. She didn't allow us to eat. She didn't allow us to drink anything. Nothing. The first night they were there, we stayed up several hours. I think it was like around 9 or 10 o'clock when we first met her. We were up to 6, 7 o'clock the next morning, and for hours, all she did was make us watch these documentaries and tapes at the time about cults. And she kept referencing our church to these cults. Now, she had never been here. She had never been to the Word of Faith. She never met a member of the Word of Faith, except Shanamuse, and maybe ex-members possibly, but she had never been to the church. So, I remember sitting there thinking, how can you make that association between us and you've never met us? You know, I remember one of the things that frightened me the most was the documentary on Jim Jones. And I had never heard that story before, and how she kept referencing, this is Jane Whaley, Jim Jones, all you obey everything she says, and eventually this is what's going to happen to you, And I remember just sitting there terrified. I knew it wasn't true what she was saying. She never met Jane Whaley. My pastor had never, that's not even in her nature to do anything as such, and so I noticed the more I resisted and combated what she said, the angrier she got. She just got really angry with me and yelled at me, used a lot of profanity, and was really just upset with me the whole process. So that was just,
Did she ever let you tell about how the church really was?
no.
You said that she never went to your church.
No, and never asked me how it really was. What was my side of the story? Nothing. It was, she knew how the church was without being there. She thought. Uh, so that went on that day, and we were there. I was literally locked up in the hotel room for 3 days. Wasn't allowed to go anywhere. Someone had to be with me at all times, just in the room. Even when I went to the restroom, someone's by the door. They, kept the door propped open with their foot, just so that I couldn't do anything without them seeing. It was quite embarrassing. Um, so after 3 days, they're at the hotel room. We then go to her place where she was staying, and I remember very vividly driving up to the house. I noticed that there were bars on the windows, and not only were there bars on the windows, but there were actually plastic that covered the windows so that you couldn't see on in. Allow light to penetrate, but you could not see anything. Um, I remember distinctly, and I kind of thought it was weird. I noticed that her nephew, her brother, and her mother all live there at the place. And at first, I don't know why I thought it was weird, but looking back, I see why. So we're there, and I was made to stay upstairs in this bedroom. I noticed on the bedroom that on the door that there was a chain on the outside, not the inside of the room, but there was a chain on the outside. So in the event that, if I wanted to get out, I couldn't. Again, that's where I stayed at night. So there was a chain on the outside the door. I noticed that on the bedroom door and on the bathroom doors, the locks were reversed. In other words, you lock the door from the outside rather than the inside of the bedroom or the bathroom doors. And so I remember thinking, I am scared out of my wits. I don't know what on this is going on. So after being there for, I think I was there like several more days, like 3 or 4 more days, maybe longer. It's happened so long ago, I can't remember. But I distinctly remember her brother, and he was a very, very abusive type person. Used a lot of profanity, vulgar language, and he was constantly always in my face. I remember one time we were going through this session of watching tapes, and I remember him getting in my face and saying, "You're nothing but a nigger." I remember sitting. I remember distinctly this one time. I was so upset. I had enough of watching these cults and all these documentaries, and so I got up and I left the room. Well, he got furious with me. He got my face, and he said, you're ticking me off right now. He said, get your blankety blank back in that room. And I said, no. So he literally picked me up and he threw me down in the chair and he said, you will do what I tell you to do. You will watch these tapes. And this went on for several days. I remember being there and mind you, again, I'm all under their control. They dictated when I was able to eat, when I was, when I was able to sleep. Every time when we were watching tapes, when I tried to purposefully fall asleep so I didn't have to watch them, they would constantly push and prod me, hit me to wake me up so that I had to watch these tapes. And I noticed that, when I was really tired, that's when they really came after me. That's when they became more abusive. They're trying to break me down. And the main thing that they wanted out of me is they wanted me to denounce Word of Faith, tell them that I didn't want to be here, and that they wanted on tape. They wanted on camera me saying this. They wanted me to explain that this was an abusive environment and that I no longer wanted to attend the Word of Faith. Yeah. That was their main goal. Um, so at that time, in my heart, I knew the Word of Faith was where I wanted to be, and I knew what they were saying was lies because I had been here for 2 years, living here in peace and happiness. How could I renounce that and all of a sudden say, oh yes, I'm in an abusive environment? It wasn't true. I couldn't even lie if I wanted to. So, so at that point, we after everything had gone on, my father had actually went back to Michigan for a brief moment, and he came back. And after all the abuse had gone on for several days, I told my dad, I said, either you get me out of here, or I will never talk to you and visit you again once I turn 18. I turned 18 February 26th of that year. This was January, somewhere mid-January that this had gone on. So it was just, a matter of several weeks before I turned 18. I explained to him, if you don't get me out of here, after everything I've been through, I said, I will never talk to you again. And then that's when my dad realized that, you know what, the real abuse is going on here. I didn't experience this at the word with the Deprogrammer.
Mary
That's
Chronologer.
okay. Mary Alice
Your dad
Chronologer.
realized
Yes,
that?
my dad realized that the real abuse was with Mary Alice Chronologer and this whole organization chain. One thing I do want to emphasize is you talked about well springs. I did talk to Dr. Paul Martin, and one of the things that
And is he with Wellsprings? Well,
he,
or
he,
was at
he,
that time?
he was the founder of Wellsprings.
Okay.
Speaking with him,
Did you speak with him when you were with Mary?
with Mary Alice Chronologer, I never did
was
go to
she
Wellsprings.
affiliated
Yes,
with him?
she was because I had to talk to him on several occasions
Okay.
when she told me to.
Right.
Okay, and I remember distinctly talking to him, and he would ask me questions such as, are you depressed? Are you experiencing vomiting? Are you having blood in your vomit? Are you experiencing vomit, blood in your stool? Those type things, and I just thought it was absolutely weird. So, eventually, after all this happened, my father took me back to Saginaw, and from there, I waited till I turned 18. At some points, I remember my pastor actually came to visit uh, Saginaw. And this was like maybe a few weeks after I had experienced all this. Jane Whaley and Carol Reynolds actually came up to Saginaw to visit me and actually visit my pastor in Saginaw. What ended up happening was, long story short, Jane Whaley felt something was wrong with my pastor in Saginaw, Jean Homer. She had no idea what happened. Jane Whaley called my dad and asked her, what's going on with Jean? I feel like something's wrong. And that's when my dad had told her she had a large mass size of a baseball on her chest. Jane Whaley had no idea that this went on, so that's when she came up to Saginaw to visit. And this is just a few weeks after this whole incident happened. So, you can still see the love there, where,
Yeah. For time's sake, did your parents eventually, acknowledge
yes,
some wrong in having you go there?
well, absolutely. They repented
out
to
of
me.
their ignorance.
They repented to me for what they did. They regret that they ever did it, and our relationship is the same. We still communicate. We visit each other. We talk, on a weekly basis. So everything is wonderful.
That's great. And so we're running out of time, And that was Joveille Clark, and we just have 30 seconds left. So you can go to our website, and you will hear actually another amazing story with Joveille, where he is now married. He has two wonderful children. One of them was diagnosed with cancer, and God has been miraculously healing his son. And you're going to hear about that through the prayer that you've heard about at Word of Faith, and God's healing. And so thank you for tuning in. Again, this is Word of Faith Speaks Out. We're going to be back Wednesday, Friday, 8:30 to 9. Our website is wordoffaithfellowship.org. And thank you again for listening to us.